Hello, I'm Jocelyn Kochi, and today I'd like to look at canons, their place as essential repertoire, and offer some strategies for learning them and for playing them effectively. By way of background, I'm composer of the AMEB's Level 1 technical exercises, which include the second grade canon Tame to Tango. I'm conscious that many teachers are finding this very challenging to teach to their students, and today, with the permission of the AMEB, I'll be able to offer you some strategies for learning these and some suggestions and ideas. I'm also composer of the AMEB's Series 17 Canons, so many of you will have played these, or your students will have played these in their first grade exams, and we'll go over one or two of those today as well. In addition, published by Wirripang are two of my other books of canons, which are a canonical adventure and conquering canons. The simplest of these is a canonical adventure, and three of the canons for the AMEB's Series 17 have been drawn from this book. And the other is Conquering Canons, and although Round the Garden came from this book, the majority of the canons in this are more difficult, more challenging for students to learn. So canons they serve a very important function as an introduction to counterpoint and contrapuntal music. And for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, contrapuntal simply means that it uses a compositional structure called counterpoint, which involves having two or more parts or musical lines which each are independent in their own right, but which interact together to create a cohesive whole. Sometimes these can be very complex, think the fugues of Bach and other contemporary composers, but at their most simple we have canons and rounds, such as Row, Row, Row Your Boat, which have two identical parts which overlap in strict imitation. Even within the realm of canons, some of them are more complex than others, so I'll be going over both kinds today to give you an idea of how they should be broken down and put back together again without them losing the autonomy of each line. The Tame to Tango, being a second grade canon, I should say right from the outset, is not the best place to start with learning canons. You'd be far better off to start with the canons in a canonical adventure, which, the reason I wrote these two books is to provide students with an opportunity to learn canons from the ground floor up, so that you can go through the simpler and the more complex canons as an introduction and a good grounding for playing the more challenging contrapuntal music that students will be facing as they get further advanced in their studies. So I'll go through a couple of the simpler canons first and different types, and then I'll go on to Tame to Tango and take a look at that. So the first one I'd like to look at that comes from a canonical adventure is Canoeing Down the Canon. Now this one comes from, was published in the AMEB's Series 17 exam books, grade 1 books, so many of you will have played this one. I have some strategies for this also, which are published online at the Australasian Piano Teachers Facebook page in their files section, so you may like to look those up and find them there. So looking at Canoeing Down the Canon, I'll just play it through for you first. So what I would do first with this one is to have my student take it away from the piano and have a look at it overall to see where the parts are, so that they can see visually what's going on in the music. And I always like my students to look at everything away from the piano first. So I would have them colour those parts when they've worked them out. So you might have something like this, where they can see that they have got a blue phrase and they've got a red phrase. So the subject in this is actually over 4 bars. that is the complete canon as such, or the subject of the canon, and then it overlaps in the left hand. And that's made up of 2 phrases, a long one and a short one, and they overlap at 2 bars. So the first thing I would do is to have the student go through this just separate hands right through, just to get a feel for the flow. And for the phrasing, because the phrasing in all of these canons is very, very important and often overlaps, so that makes it even more challenging. They can see that it's exactly the same material. They've coloured it anyway, so they know, and the only bits that's different are the end bits. The next thing I would do is have them overlap the 2 blue, or all of the blue parts together. They can do that without too much difficulty. And it's really important that they don't slow down in this and lose the tempo, because one of the problems, I think, with learning canons and any contrapuntal music really is that students often look at the notes note by note when they're putting them together, because they're trying to work out what's going on in each hand. And the most important thing is to look at the line and overlap the line and have the line still flowing, so that if you lose tempo, then you tend to be starting to look at note against note instead of part against part. Excuse me. So what I would do after that, when they're comfortable with that overlap, is bring in the right hand red phrase, but not the left hand one. Well, actually, what I'd probably do is just work on that first right and left hand with the extra red one to begin with, without giving them too much overlap to think of. So. And do that a few times, and then add the left hand blue part back in. And so forth. And when they're very comfortable with that, then bring in the left hand red bit, perhaps on its own without the right hand one. So we might have. And you can have this repeating over and over again. I always stick in repeat dots in strategic places so that as much repetition as I like can be put into it. Once they have done that, they've pretty much got all of the parts working, just not all at the same time. So one of the problems with canons is to get, or one of the difficulties, one of the challenges, is to get the phrases interacting when they're different in each hand, and the other is to get the hands moving quickly, or the brain moving quickly enough to move the hands to cover those overlaps. So taking it apart in smaller sections like that is going to be more effective. Now, some of the strategies that I've put into that page that's on the Australasian Piano Teachers Facebook page. The first one I've put in is the first simple overlap. With repeats, and the second one is taking through just the right hand second phrase with the left hand long phrase. And then the other way around. So when you have covered all of those different strategies, pulled it apart and worked it back together in those different ways, your student should have very little trouble putting this together and having it really flow and work beautifully. So the next one I would like to look at is Cotton Candy. It's the second one in the Canonical Adventures book. And this one is a little different. I'll play it through first. Okay, so this particular canon has a 5-bar subject and then another 5-bar subject. So again, I would have my student take this away from the piano and have a look at what's going on in the music, and they're going to colour the parts as they see them. So they'll come back with something like this. So they'll have so we've got they've coloured pink, perhaps the first subject in the right hand. And then the same matching phrase in the left hand. And then the second one they will have done in blue. And the matching left hand phrase. And then the first phrase, or the first subject, is repeated again slightly differently. The first 2 bars are an octave higher. The left hand is not an octave higher, that stays where it is and has a slightly different ending to cater for the ending. So what I would do there again is overlap the pink phrases, so the first right hand and left hand phrases or subjects. And then when they've worked on that a little bit, then we do the same thing with the blues. And then they can do the same thing with the last pink ones. And the last little ending in the right hand doesn't need to come in just yet. What I would probably do after that, once they're very comfortable with that, is to start with the first left hand phrase, which is a pink one, and put that together with the first blue, which is the second right hand phrase. So we might have this. And then do the same thing with the next, as they go along in order, so the next left hand phrase with the next right hand one. And then at that point, when you bring in the next ones, you can bring in that little ending in the right hand. And in this way, when they work through it this way, they're putting together all of the canon. They've got it all together, but just not all at once. So they're not having to think about too much overlap at once. So once they are comfortable with that, this won't be too difficult to put together, and you've managed to keep the tempo going and keep the flow going. So that's Cotton Candy. The next one I'll look at is Rolling in the Canon Fields, which also was in the AMEB's Series 17 and is also from a canonical adventure. So this one again is a little different. The subject is over 3 bars and it overlaps at 1 bar. So in terms of the way the phrases are shaped, it doesn't lend itself to the usual way of overlapping. I would still have my students colour not each individual phrase so much as each long subject, so I would have them probably colour. As one phrase, and then the repeat in the right hand. And then it repeats starting from there. That's one way that they could look at it. The other way would be for them to colour each individual phrase, which is each bar. So they might do this blue, might do this green, they might do this red. Then back to blue, green, red, blue, and then we've got the ending, which is entirely different. And of course the matching phrases in the right hand. Putting them together, I probably wouldn't follow the usual strategy that I have for having the overlap because it doesn't really lend itself to it. What I have done is give some, following the Canon fields, give some other strategies which are also on the Australasian Piano Teachers Facebook page in their files section. And the first way I would do that would be to have and just work that a few times so that they can experience what it's like to flow into that section. Then take the next section and that gives them an opportunity to bring in, again, some of the notes together, but not all of them. The next thing is to add another little bit in, so from so they can get used to putting that bit together, and then the next thing would be to put the those two sections together. And then after that you only have the end bit to worry about. So those again are available on the Australasian Piano Pedagogy, Australasian Piano Teachers Facebook page in their files section if you need those. Okay, so now I'll have a quick look at the one from the technical workbook, which is Too Tame to Tango. So as I've said, this is not the place to start with learning canons. Being a second grade canon, it is quite a complicated canon. So again, I'll play it through. Again, by the time you've watched through this tutorial and you've seen how I've taken things apart and put them back together again, you should have a pretty good idea of how to work with this one. So if you look at this in terms of the phrases and you have your student colour this, you're going to have as the first phrase and the matching phrase in the left hand. And then a different colour should be put on the next phrase and its equivalent in the left hand. And then the next phrase can be coloured the same colour as the first one because it is identical material except for the introduction. And the same thing in the left hand, it's got a slightly different introduction. And then the next right hand phrase can be coloured the same as the second phrase because it is the same material, and the equivalent in the left hand. So then you can put those parts together in overlap with just each section. So if you've coloured the first one's blue, we'll have and once they've worked through that a few times, you can take the next two, which you may have coloured red, now the next section you'll be back to blue again, and you'll have just a slightly different introduction to that section. And if the introduction in the left hand is going to be tricky for the student, perhaps leave it out for the moment. So you might have so that you can keep the flow going. The most important thing is to have this all correctly articulated and correctly phrased before you put any of it together. And then when you're putting it together, you're putting a tiny little bit at a time, just so that you can, well, the minimal amount at a time in overlap, so that you're not going to lose that the articulations, and you're not going to lose the phrasing, and you're not going to lose the tempo. You've got to keep the flow going at all costs. That's what this is all about. So then the last one. So they're going to go together that way, and then what you can do is you can separate out the other parts. So you can start with the first left hand blue and go with the first right hand red. And do that a few times, and then take the next, so it'll be the left hand red with the next right hand blue. And then the final left hand, the next left hand blue with the right hand red. And then you will have taken all of those parts together. Everything will have been done, but you will just have to, again, bring the parts closer together by putting, you'll have the imitations coming closer together. So sometimes it's too much to do the whole thing, so because they've got to think ahead so quickly to get to the next place where their hands have got to move to and the next bit of material. So just cut it down. Once you've got the individual elements worked, you've got the minimal amount of overlap in both directions, then just take a small amount together. Even just to there, and then you can move on and add a little bit more to it the next time. To there. And then keep adding a little bit more. So I hope that's been helpful. I will be doing more tutorials on canons because there are still a load of different types of canons, and they can be very, very tricky to work through if you don't have any strategies in place for them. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'd like to particularly thank both the AMEB for giving me permission to work through Tame to Tango with you today, and also Wirripang, who always give me permission to work through any of my pieces which they have published with you on these online tutorials. So those books are available from Wirripang at www.australiancomposers.com.au.